What if the woman who had captured the heart of a prince, who had dazzled the world with her charm and poise, was hiding a secret so explosive it could shatter the monarchy itself? Imagine waking up one morning to a headline that reads, "She is linked to Epstein. King Charles announces Meghan Markle permanently stripped of royal title." Your mind would race. You'd think, this can't be real. How is this possible? Yet, here we are, standing at the center of a storm that the royal family never expected, a scandal that stretches from Buckingham Palace to the shadows of the world's most infamous billionaire networks. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. From the moment Meghan Markle stepped into the royal spotlight, the public adored her. She was everything a modern duchess should be: charismatic, relatable, charmingly outspoken. But behind the smiles and carefully curated appearances, whispers had begun to circulate, quiet at first, almost imperceptible, then louder, more insistent. Some dismissed them as conspiracy theories, wild guesses fueled by envy or tabloid sensationalism. Others knew there was more to the story, a darkness lurking beneath the polished veneer. And now, with King Charles taking the unprecedented step of stripping her of her royal title permanently, the whispers have transformed into a deafening roar. Why would the king act so decisively? What could have possibly crossed the line? Was it merely public scandal, or was there something deeper, more dangerous, more irreversible? The palace, known for its secrecy, its decorum, its unyielding commitment to tradition, rarely makes such sweeping public statements. This decree is not just administrative. It is symbolic, absolute, and devastating. It sends a message not only to Meghan but to the world. The monarchy will not tolerate secrets of this magnitude, no matter who is involved. The story doesn't start with the king's announcement. It begins long before Meghan ever walked down the aisle at St. George's Chapel. Her early years, filled with ambition and determination, would shape a woman capable of captivating a prince and the public alike. Yet even then, hints of a hidden world were present. There were people, places, and connections that did not fit the carefully constructed narrative of the aspiring actress from Los Angeles. Friends would later recall odd phone calls, unexpected meetings, and influential figures who seemed oddly intertwined with her career and social trajectory. Was it coincidence? Or something much more deliberate? And then there is the elephant in the room. The infamous name that sends chills through corridors of power and whispers through the tabloids: Jeffrey Epstein. The very mention conjures images of wealth, corruption, and a network that spanned the globe. Epstein was a man whose reach and influence defied imagination, whose relationships touched royalty, politicians, and celebrities alike. The allegation that Meghan Markle is linked to Epstein is not just explosive. It is a direct challenge to the integrity of the monarchy. The implications ripple outward like shockwaves, touching not only the palace but international relations, public trust, and the reputation of one of the most scrutinized families in history. You might be wondering, how could this have gone unnoticed for so long? That's exactly what insiders are asking. The palace has long operated under a veil of secrecy, shielding scandals and controversies from public view. But some secrets have a way of surfacing, no matter how tightly controlled the narrative. Investigations, leaks, and painstaking intelligence work have brought previously hidden facts to light. Documents, emails, and accounts that were once buried now form a mosaic of shocking connections. And when King Charles finally saw the full picture, the decision was made. There could be no leniency, no half measures, no quietly dismissed missteps. The stakes were simply too high. This is not a story about rumors. This is a story about consequences, about power, trust, betrayal, and the lengths to which the monarchy will go to protect its legacy. It is about a duchess who rose to unimaginable heights, only to find that secrets, once unearthed, can dismantle everything you hold dear. It is about a king faced with an impossible choice, a son caught between loyalty and truth, and a world watching as the fabric of one of history's most revered institutions is tested in ways no one could have predicted. And yet, even as the public reacts with shock, disbelief, and a flood of online commentary, the most significant revelations are still waiting to emerge. What exactly was uncovered? What evidence linked Meghan Markle to Epstein? How deep does this network go? and who else might be implicated. The palace remains tight-lipped, offering no further explanation beyond the official announcement. But those closest to the investigation know that the documents, emails, and testimonies paint a picture far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. Consider the human element. Prince Harry, once fiercely protective of Meghan, now finds himself navigating a labyrinth of conflicting emotions. Love, loyalty, betrayal, and outrage collide as he confronts the evidence and witnesses the irreversible damage. Meanwhile, the public struggles to reconcile the Meghan they knew, the actress, the advocate, the royal, with the shadow that now threatens to define her legacy. And what about King Charles? His decision reflects decades of experience, a keen understanding of protocol, and a desire to safeguard the monarchy's credibility. Yet it also exposes the deep fissures that exist within the family, fissures that may never fully heal. As we delve deeper into this story, keep one question at the forefront of your mind. How far can power, influence, and secrecy stretch before it snaps under the weight of truth? What started as whispers has become a tidal wave, one that promises to upend lives, reputations, and the very foundation of the royal institution. And just when you think you understand the gravity of the situation, new layers, hidden details, and shocking twists emerge, proving that this story is far from over. So, are you ready to uncover the truth? To explore the hidden connections, the palace secrets, and the web that ties Meghan Markle to the world's most notorious scandals? Because what came next, what the palace discovered in private, what King Charles acted upon publicly, is something that will leave the world reeling. Secrets that were meant to stay buried are now exposed, and the repercussions are only beginning to unfold. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The day began like any other in London. Fog drifting over the Thames, the distant hum of traffic, the palace seemingly calm behind its iron gates. But inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere was far from ordinary. Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to tense conversations, and soon, the tension became palpable. For in the quiet of the king's private chambers, a decision was made that would shake the monarchy to its core. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, was permanently stripped of her royal title. The decree was unprecedented. Never before had a royal been removed so decisively, so publicly, without any opportunity for redemption or private negotiation. The announcement did not merely revoke a title. It symbolically severed a bond that had been celebrated around the world. Meghan, once embraced as the modern face of royalty, was now officially persona non grata, a permanent outsider. And the reasoning, though officially discreet, had layers that the public would soon begin to unravel. King Charles, known for his patience, diplomacy, and careful navigation of royal protocol, did not arrive at this decision lightly. Behind the polished exterior of regal calm, he had spent weeks reviewing confidential reports, meeting with advisors, and assessing the delicate balance between familial loyalty and institutional integrity. To strip a title from a family member, especially one married to a beloved prince, was not simply a bureaucratic procedure. It was a personal, moral, and political act. It was a statement that some lines, once crossed, are irreparable. The palace communications team prepared the public statement with meticulous care, ensuring every word conveyed authority without compromising discretion. The statement read, in part, "Following a thorough review and consideration of recent findings, Her Royal Highness Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, has been permanently relieved of her royal title." Simple, precise, and devastating. The wording was deliberate. There were no ambiguities, no room for negotiation, no hint of leniency. In the eyes of the monarchy, this was final. But what had triggered such a monumental action? Reports suggest that palace investigators had uncovered troubling connections and evidence that challenged not only public perception, but also the trust and integrity of the royal family itself. While details were tightly held within a circle of trusted aides, leaks soon hinted at a web of associations far more complex than anyone had imagined. These were not casual acquaintances or minor indiscretions. They were links to a network with implications reaching across continents, touching some of the most powerful and secretive circles in the world. The public reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Social media erupted with speculation, outrage, and disbelief. Headlines splashed across newspapers and online platforms. Duchess stripped of title, royal scandal unveiled, the monarchy in crisis. For the first time in decades, the British monarchy faced a story that transcended gossip columns and tabloids. This was international news, and the world watched as Buckingham Palace navigated the fallout. Meanwhile, within the palace walls, emotions ran high. Staff members whispered in corridors, security protocols tightened, and advisors debated the potential ramifications of the announcement. King Charles, ever aware of the delicate optics, balanced his personal feelings with the demands of public duty. He had witnessed decades of public scrutiny, family tensions, and political maneuvering, but this moment was different. This was about safeguarding the crown itself, protecting its legacy, and demonstrating that even the most charismatic and beloved members were accountable. Prince Harry, for his part, was blindsided. Although he had known Meghan to be ambitious, savvy, and fiercely independent, he could never have anticipated that such a public and irrevocable action would occur without warning. The announcement forced him into a private reckoning. How to reconcile loyalty to his wife with his allegiance to his father and the institution of the monarchy. His advisors urged caution, reminding him that every word and action would be dissected by both the press and the public. Yet, Harry was caught in a moral and emotional bind, knowing that the palace's decision was not reversible. Insiders suggest that the decree was prompted not only by personal considerations, but also by a broader concern for the monarchy's reputation. In an age of relentless media scrutiny, where secrets are impossible to keep and narratives spread instantaneously, the royal family recognized the need to act decisively. Any hesitation or ambiguity could be exploited, misinterpreted, or misrepresented, leading to long-term damage that could outlast any individual scandal. By making a firm, public statement, King Charles signaled that the monarchy would not tolerate actions that undermined its credibility or endangered its standing on the world stage. Even as the decree reverberated through media outlets and royal circles, questions persisted. What exactly had Meghan done, or been linked to, that warranted such a response? The palace's silence only fueled speculation. Analysts, historians, and political commentators offered theories ranging from breaches of protocol to financial improprieties, from personal misconduct to connections with controversial figures. Each new report, each whispered rumor, added fuel to the fire, creating a narrative that was part fact, part speculation, and entirely mesmerizing to the public. And yet, the most significant details remained hidden. Behind closed doors, the palace possessed documents, communications, and evidence that painted a picture far more alarming than the public could imagine. The king's advisors, legal teams, and private investigators had pieced together a mosaic of information, carefully verifying every fact before presenting it to the monarch. It was this painstaking process, this accumulation of verified evidence, that led to the irrevocable decree. The decision also carried profound personal consequences. For Meghan, the loss of her title meant more than symbolic humiliation. It represented a complete severing of her connection to the royal family, her responsibilities, privileges, and social standing. Invitations to royal events would cease, security arrangements would change, and the privileges afforded to her as a duchess would vanish. It was a public, permanent declaration that she no longer belonged within the hallowed halls of the palace. For the monarchy, the announcement was both protective and precarious. By acting decisively, the king aimed to shield the institution from further scrutiny, speculation, or scandal. But the move also risked deepening rifts within the family, alienating supporters, and creating an international storm of controversy. Every public statement, every media interview, and every social media post would now be interpreted through the lens of this unprecedented action. Yet, even as the world processed the shocking news, the palace prepared for the next phase. Damage control, public relations strategy, and careful monitoring of reactions from both the public and international leaders. Allies and critics alike were weighing in, each with their own interpretations, assumptions, and theories. The palace understood that perception would be as important as the decree itself. And while all eyes were on London, questions persisted in hushed tones behind the palace gates. What evidence had been uncovered? How deep did the connections run? Who else might be implicated? And most importantly, what would this mean for the monarchy's future? The answers, when revealed, would shock not only the public but also the family itself, reshaping relationships, reputations, and legacies in ways no one could have predicted. The day the decree was announced, London's skyline seemed unchanged, but the world had shifted. A duchess had fallen from favor. A king had acted decisively. A scandal had erupted that would dominate headlines for months, perhaps years. And for the public, the question remained, what came next? Behind the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace, behind the headlines and speculation, secrets were still waiting to emerge, secrets that would push the story from shocking to utterly unthinkable. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Chapter 1 is complete. Do you want me to move on to Chapter 2, Meghan Markle's shadowed past next? You said, go. ChatGPT said, perfect. Let's move on to Chapter 2, Meghan Markle's shadowed past. This will be 2,000 plus words, following your rules for hooks, pacing, emotional beats, and cliffhangers. Before Meghan Markle became a global figure, before she captivated the attention of a prince and millions around the world, there was a life less public, a life that many assumed was ordinary but was quietly layered with ambition, secrecy, and connections that would later cast long shadows. Understanding her past is not just about tracing her career as an actress or her rise in the social spotlight. It's about uncovering the threads that tie her to the extraordinary decisions being made today. What you are about to read is a story few have pieced together, a journey that shows how the past can ripple through time, creating consequences that no amount of royal protocol or public charm can undo. Meghan's early years in Los Angeles were marked by ambition, charm, and a drive that set her apart from her peers. Friends and acquaintances would later describe her as intensely focused, a young woman who navigated both elite social circles and professional networks with precision. She was determined to succeed in the competitive world of acting, but she was also aware that her personal relationships, who she met, and who she aligned herself with, would influence not only her career but her public persona. Some saw it as savvy networking. Others would later interpret these connections differently, as the beginning of a web of associations that could have far-reaching consequences. Even as a young adult, Meghan displayed a knack for building relationships with influential figures. There were charity events, celebrity fundraisers, and exclusive gatherings where she appeared not merely as an actress, but as someone adept at moving in circles where power and influence intertwined. Invitations to private dinners, meetings with media moguls, and introductions to high-profile socialites became part of her routine. To an outsider, these were simply the perks of ambition. To insiders, they hinted at a world that was more interconnected and, at times, more shadowed than the public realized. While much of her early career followed a conventional path in the entertainment industry, subtle anomalies began to surface. Certain projects, roles, and opportunities seemed to appear with uncanny timing. Friends would later recall mysterious calls, unexpected offers, and introductions to people whose influence extended far beyond Hollywood. These were individuals with connections that reached into politics, finance, and international networks. While no one fully understood the significance at the time, the traces left behind suggested that Meghan's ascent was not merely the result of talent and charm. It was shaped, at least in part, by the people she encountered and the circle she entered. Then there were the personal relationships that drew attention. Meghan's friendships were often with people who seemed to occupy positions of influence or power, some of whom were later revealed to have connections to controversial figures. The nature of these associations was murky, and while the young actress maintained a public image of openness and authenticity, the private realities were far more complex. Some observers noticed patterns. Connections that suggested Meghan was navigating a network that few understood fully, a network that would later intersect with some of the most notorious names in the world. It's essential to understand that Meghan's story is not one of simplistic moral judgment. She was ambitious, strategic, and aware of the doors that certain relationships could open. Many rising stars leverage connections to advance careers. But in Meghan's case, these relationships would eventually intersect with figures whose influence was both powerful and dangerous, and whose legacies carried shadows that could engulf anyone caught in their orbit. Questions would later arise. Was she aware of the full implications of these associations? Could she have anticipated the consequences? And most importantly, how did these connections contribute to the events that led to King Charles's unprecedented decree? As Meghan transitioned from Hollywood to the royal stage, these past connections did not vanish. They followed her. Invitations, communications, and interactions from her earlier life became part of the palace scrutiny. Advisors, investigators, and insiders began piecing together a chronology, tracing how relationships developed, who was involved, and what influence they might have exerted. Even the most innocuous-seeming meetings were re-examined under a lens of extraordinary caution, especially when sensitive figures and controversial networks were involved. Consider the contrast. On one hand, Meghan appeared as the modern, approachable duchess, championing charitable causes, speaking passionately about women's rights, and embodying a public image of empathy and engagement. On the other hand, behind closed doors, every connection from her past was being scrutinized, and every email, document, or anecdote was being evaluated for its potential implications. The palace's internal reviews suggested that some of these past associations were not merely professional. They were personal and potentially compromising. By the time Meghan met Prince Harry, she had already mastered the art of navigating complex social landscapes. She knew how to present herself, how to command attention, and how to manage perception. But the very skills that made her successful in Hollywood would later be seen as double-edged. Her ability to cultivate relationships and maneuver in elite circles left a trail that, in the eyes of the monarchy, required careful and, ultimately, irreversible action. Every introduction, every contact, and every interaction was now a piece of a larger puzzle that the palace had begun assembling with painstaking diligence. And then there was the question of timing. Some of Meghan's past connections intersected with historical events and notorious figures at critical moments. Even the slightest overlap, when viewed from a palace perspective, could no longer be dismissed. Were these connections coincidental, innocuous, or deliberate? Investigators would later uncover documents and correspondences that suggested the latter, raising alarm bells that prompted urgent discussions at the highest levels of the monarchy. The tension between public perception and private scrutiny reached a breaking point. Meghan was beloved by many, admired for her charm, her eloquence, and her advocacy. Yet, the monarchy faced a difficult reality. Appearances could no longer outweigh facts, and the potential consequences of hidden associations were too great to ignore. The palace needed clarity, transparency, and action. And so, what began as a quiet internal review transformed into a monumental decision that would reverberate across the world. It is easy to forget, in the glare of global attention, that Meghan's shadowed past was not about a single moment, a single misstep, or a single connection. It was a tapestry, woven over years of interactions, choices, and associations, some innocuous, some deeply consequential. And when the palace began examining this tapestry, the patterns that emerged were as revealing as they were disturbing. Advisors, lawyers, and investigators compiled timelines, cross-referenced contacts, and evaluated the potential risks to the monarchy. The deeper they delved, the clearer it became that the situation was far more serious than anyone had anticipated. So, when King Charles issued his decree, it was not an impulsive act of anger. It was the culmination of months of investigation, deliberation, and strategic thinking. Every meeting, every call, every connection from Meghan's past had been considered, and the evidence suggested that her associations posed a risk to the crown, its credibility, and its global standing. What was once a personal story of ambition and opportunity had evolved into a matter of national and international consequence. And yet, even now, questions remain. How deep did these connections run? Who else was involved? And what exactly did the palace uncover that led to the irrevocable decision to strip Meghan of her title? The answers are not simple, and the full scope of her shadowed past is only beginning to emerge. As we explore the next chapters, we will uncover the links, the documents, and the revelations that tie Meghan Markle to the events that have shaken Buckingham Palace and the world to its core. But what came next would push the boundaries of disbelief even further, and no one could have predicted the magnitude of what the palace had uncovered. What if the people you trusted, the networks you navigated with care, weren't just about opportunity or ambition, but were connected to one of the most infamous, secretive, and dangerous figures in modern history? That's the question Buckingham Palace found itself confronting when investigators uncovered the first threads linking Meghan Markle, however indirectly, to Jeffrey Epstein. To hear it whispered in the halls of the palace was like hearing a ghost, someone from the past whose shadow could reach across oceans and decades, threatening not just reputations, but the very integrity of the monarchy. The name Jeffrey Epstein is enough to send shivers down the spine of anyone who's followed global scandals. A man whose wealth, power, and connections were nearly unrivaled, Epstein had access to the world's elite, politicians, celebrities, and royalty alike. His private world was meticulously hidden, yet meticulously interconnected, forming networks that were difficult to penetrate and even harder to understand. And now, in the quiet offices of Buckingham Palace, investigators had begun to notice a pattern. Meghan Markle, through acquaintances, events, and meetings, had intersected, even if indirectly, with elements of Epstein's vast web. This was not about a direct, public association. Meghan had never been seen attending Epstein's notorious parties or appearing in his inner circle in any documented way. But palace investigators, armed with access to emails, event records, travel logs, and third-party testimonies, discovered overlaps that were impossible to ignore. Connections, no matter how seemingly innocuous, began to form a pattern, a map that linked Hollywood's social events, charity galas, and influential networks to Epstein's sphere of influence. The question was no longer if she had encountered these networks, but why, when, and with what awareness. To understand the gravity, consider Epstein's modus operandi. He cultivated relationships strategically, targeting individuals whose influence could extend his reach or legitimize his public persona. He mixed philanthropy, high society appearances, and personal connections in ways that blurred the lines between public benefit and private leverage. To cross paths with him, or even with those within his orbit, was to risk entanglement in a network whose consequences were hidden, delayed, and often devastating. For Meghan, investigators noted, certain professional opportunities, introductions, and high-profile events coincided with figures who had reported or documented ties to Epstein. Palace insiders explained that this was not a judgment about her intentions. Ambition, after all, is not a crime. Networking is not inherently nefarious. But in the royal world, perception and reality carry equal weight. Even an unintentional intersection with Epstein's network could create vulnerability, scandal, or, in the most extreme cases, threat to the monarchy. The palace, tasked with preserving centuries of legacy, could not afford to take risks, especially when whispers about connections, however indirect, were already beginning to surface in media circles and online forums. As investigators dug deeper, they traced events where Meghan's path intersected with prominent figures who had attended Epstein-linked gatherings. Charity galas in New York, Hollywood fundraisers, and philanthropic dinners in Los Angeles and London became pieces of a puzzle. Meeting invitations, guest lists, and travel itineraries were meticulously examined. The timing of certain interactions, the frequency of introductions, and the prominence of individuals present all contributed to a growing sense that something far more significant was unfolding. One of the more disturbing discoveries was the pattern of indirect associations. A friend of Meghan's, a known socialite with connections to elite finance and philanthropy, had participated in Epstein-affiliated events years before Meghan became widely known. Correspondence and introductions between Meghan and this friend were carefully mapped, revealing overlaps that suggested the Duchess had been operating within circles that, knowingly or unknowingly, intersected with Epstein's influence. The palace termed this the shadow network, an invisible web of connections that could compromise even those who were careful to maintain distance. And yet, even as these connections emerged, the question of intent remained. Was Meghan aware of the risks? Had she knowingly interacted with individuals tied to Epstein? Or had she been a careful player in a world where proximity to power often comes with unforeseen consequences? Investigators found no evidence of direct malfeasance, but in the eyes of the monarchy, proximity alone, especially when coupled with the gravity of Epstein's notoriety, was sufficient to warrant action. The palace's internal analysis also considered timing. Many of these connections, seemingly innocent at the time, were viewed retrospectively through the lens of modern scandal and scrutiny. Public awareness of Epstein's operations, revelations about his network, and his criminal investigations made previous interactions appear more dangerous in hindsight. To King Charles and his advisors, what might once have been dismissed as harmless socialization now posed a serious reputational risk to the crown. Even more alarming were the documents uncovered during the palace review. Invitations, RSVPs, and guest lists placed individuals close to Meghan in direct contact with Epstein or his associates. Emails and correspondences suggested repeated communications with intermediaries, fundraisers, and socialites linked to Epstein's influence. Each new detail, small in isolation, contributed to a broader understanding of how intertwined these social and professional worlds were. While nothing implicated Meghan directly in illegal activity, the optics, associations, and potential for scandal were undeniable. The situation was further complicated by the global nature of the connections. Epstein's reach was not limited to the United States. It extended to Europe, the Middle East, and other elite circles worldwide. Investigators had to consider international implications, including diplomatic sensitivities and potential media fallout in multiple countries. For a royal family that relies on careful public perception, every minor misstep or perceived association could have cascading consequences, creating pressure that could not be ignored. Prince Harry, again, found himself caught in the middle. Loyal to his wife, yet acutely aware of the weight of evidence and the potential for public devastation, he faced a personal dilemma. Every discussion with palace advisors, every internal debate with the king, involved balancing love, loyalty, and the unrelenting scrutiny of a world watching his every move. The palace understood that if Harry appeared to shield Meghan, the monarchy could be accused of negligence. If he sided with the king, he risked estrangement and public scrutiny. Meanwhile, public curiosity grew. Leaks, both intentional and accidental, hinted at the nature of the connections. Social media erupted with speculation. Who in Meghan's circle had ties to Epstein? How extensive were these networks? Was this the reason behind the king's unprecedented decree? The palace maintained a tight-lipped official stance, but the questions alone amplified the scandal, creating a narrative tension that captivated global audiences. And so, as investigators continued to map the web, as analysts traced lines of influence, and as the king deliberated on action, one truth became clear. The implications of Epstein's network were vast, complicated, and potentially catastrophic. What began as subtle overlaps between Meghan and elite social circles had now evolved into a full-scale investigation with global resonance. Every connection, every invitation, and every interaction was scrutinized for risk, influence, and potential scandal. Yet even as the palace took these unprecedented steps, they knew the story was far from over. The web was vast, the associations complex, and the potential fallout unpredictable. King Charles's decree was a decisive move, but it was only the beginning. As the world digested the shocking news, insiders knew there were deeper revelations yet to emerge, documents and testimonies that would further illuminate Meghan's interactions with this shadowy network. But what came next? The evidence the palace had been quietly reviewing, the documents that tied connections together in ways no one could have anticipated, would push the scandal to unimaginable heights, and it was about to surface in a way that would shock the world. In the hushed corridors of Buckingham Palace, a storm was brewing, though no one outside could hear it. King Charles, known for his measured composure and decades of royal diplomacy, was far from calm. Inside his private chambers, he paced, reviewed documents, and replayed the intelligence reports again and again. What he read made his blood boil, not in anger at Meghan Markle personally, but in disbelief at the gravity of what had been uncovered. The links, the connections, the potential for scandal. It was all far worse than anyone could have imagined. King Charles had been king in waiting for decades, and he had learned to handle crises with poise, strategy, and careful calculation. He had faced political upheavals, media storms, and family controversies before, but this was different. This was deeply personal. This was about the trust and reputation of the royal family, the institution he had been born into, and the legacy he would one day leave behind. The thought that someone so close to his family could be linked, directly or indirectly, to one of the most notorious networks in the world was intolerable. The documents alone were enough to unsettle even the most stoic of monarchs. Every email, every guest list, every correspondence between Meghan's associates and known Epstein-linked figures was meticulously catalogued by palace investigators. Charles read them not just with the eyes of a sovereign, but as a father, a protector of the institution, and a custodian of centuries of legacy. Each line in those documents represented not just a social connection, but a potential threat. A crack in the armor of the monarchy that could be exploited, sensationalized, and weaponized against them. And yet, it was not merely the content of the documents that angered him. It was the implication. How had this gone unnoticed? How could someone so closely tied to the royal family navigate these circles without detection? Questions swirled in his mind like a tempest. Was it naivety? Was it recklessness? Or was there a degree of intent that he dared not yet consider? Each possibility was more alarming than the last. Insiders described Charles's fury as incandescent, a rare glimpse into the private emotions of a man who had long been seen as reserved, deliberate, and patient. In his office, advisors and confidants watched quietly, aware that any interruption could provoke a response that would ripple through the palace. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but laced with tension, each word chosen carefully yet heavy with implied judgment. He was a man weighing history, loyalty, and legacy against betrayal, secrecy, and public scandal. The king's fury was not just about the present. It was about the potential consequences. He knew the media would erupt, public opinion would fracture, and the international perception of the monarchy could be damaged irreparably. Every misstep, every oversight, every association now had the potential to be magnified. And in a world where reputation is power, Charles understood that the smallest crack could lead to a cascade of consequences that might be impossible to contain. This fury was also deeply personal. Meghan was not just a public figure. She was married to his son, Prince Harry, a man he had loved and guided since childhood. To see the family embroiled in potential scandal, to witness the trust he had placed in his son and daughter-in-law being tested in such a public way, was a profound emotional blow. Charles had spent years navigating media storms, political pressures, and familial challenges, but this felt different. It felt like a betrayal that struck at the heart of both family and institution. Advisors urged caution. They reminded the king that the monarchy thrives on discretion, on subtlety, on careful management of perception. But Charles was resolute. The evidence, the documents, the potential implications, it demanded action. In his mind, delaying or downplaying the situation would be catastrophic. The monarchy could not afford ambiguity or leniency. It was time to act decisively, publicly, and irrevocably. The fury was compounded by frustration at the timing. Meghan's rise, her influence, her ability to command public attention, had created a situation where inaction was no longer an option. The palace had monitored her activities, her public statements, and her social circles, but what had emerged was more serious than anyone could have anticipated. It was no longer just about personal ambition or public image. It was about the safety, credibility, and longevity of the royal institution itself. Even as he prepared the public decree, Charles's mind was racing ahead. Every word of the announcement had to convey authority, finality, and the gravity of the situation. He had to protect the monarchy while managing the fallout within his own family. The phrasing, the timing, and the dissemination of the statement were meticulously considered, ensuring that the message was clear. The monarchy would not tolerate associations or actions that threatened its integrity. There were also private moments of reflection. Charles understood that the world would scrutinize not only the decree, but the emotional context behind it. Critics would call it harsh, overreaching, or vindictive. Supporters would hail it as decisive and protective. Yet for the king, The decision was neither personal revenge nor performative display. It was a necessary act of guardianship. The monarchy, centuries old, demanded unwavering vigilance against threats, internal or external. The fury extended beyond immediate scandal. It was about precedent. By acting decisively, Charles sent a message to the entire institution, to current and future royals, and to the public. No one is above accountability. Privilege does not exempt responsibility. Titles are conditional upon conduct, loyalty, and judgment. And in this case, the evidence, painstakingly gathered, cross-referenced, and verified, suggested that the threshold had been crossed. Even within the palace, tension crackled. Advisors and staff whispered in hushed tones, aware that the king's decision would be scrutinized both internally and externally. The royal household, normally a bastion of routine and protocol, was now navigating unprecedented territory. Security protocols were reviewed, communications were monitored, and contingency plans were drafted in anticipation of public and media reactions. Every step was calculated, every move deliberate, because one misstep could magnify the scandal exponentially. And yet, despite the fury, there was a sense of resolve. King Charles was not acting out of impulsive emotion. He was acting with purpose, clarity, and foresight. He understood the risks, the potential backlash, and the emotional consequences for his family. But the evidence demanded action. The links, the documents, the potential for scandal, all required a decision that would be irreversible, unambiguous, and publicly declared. For Prince Harry, witnessing this private fury was a revelation. He had known his father to be deliberate, measured, and patient, but the intensity of emotion, the clarity of resolve, and the unyielding commitment to protecting the monarchy left an impression that would shape his decisions in the coming days. Family dinners, private conversations, and whispered exchanges were now charged with tension. Every word, every glance, carried significance, hinting at the unspoken truth that the palace was dealing with something extraordinary. And while the public only saw the headline, the palace knew the depth of the issue. King Charles's fury was not theater. It was the culmination of months of investigation, verification, and analysis. It was the emotional and moral response to a discovery that challenged both familial trust and institutional integrity. Every email, every document, every correspondence that had come to light fueled the king's determination. Meghan Markle's permanent removal from the monarchy was not just justified. It was necessary. But even as the decree was finalized and ready for public release, one question lingered in every corner of Buckingham Palace. How much more remained undiscovered? What had investigators yet to uncover in the shadows of Meghan's connections, her past associations, and the networks that intersected with some of the most notorious figures in modern history? Because what came next, what the king saw in the final documents, what he acted upon in fury, would reveal secrets even the most seasoned palace insiders had not anticipated. And it was about to surface in a way that would send shockwaves far beyond the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace. Prince Harry had always been a man of strong instincts, someone who followed his heart even when it led him into complicated terrain. Yet nothing could have prepared him for the moment he learned of his wife's permanent removal from the royal family. The news hit him like a thunderclap, reverberating through every part of his life. He felt anger, confusion, betrayal, and a heavy sense of helplessness, all at once. How could the woman he loved, the mother of his children, be at the center of a storm so vast, so public, and so irreversible? Harry's first reaction was disbelief. Even with the palace investigations underway, even knowing that King Charles had been reviewing sensitive information, the reality of the announcement was staggering. A part of him wanted to deny it, to hope that this was a temporary measure, a misunderstanding that would soon be rectified. But deep down, he knew that the monarchy had reached a decision that could not be undone. For Harry, it wasn't just the personal heartbreak. It was the realization that the institution he had sworn loyalty to now stood in opposition to the woman he loved. The tension within Harry was immediate and intense. On one hand, he had loyalty to his father, the king, a man who had shaped much of his understanding of duty, responsibility, and family legacy. On the other, there was Meghan, whose ambition, charisma, and determination had captured his heart and guided his path since the early days of their relationship. Now, loyalty and love were colliding in ways he had never imagined. Every decision, every word, every glance felt laden with consequences. He was trapped in a web of family expectations, public scrutiny, and personal emotion. Advisors quickly stepped in, offering counsel and cautioning against hasty reactions. "You must consider the public optics," they warned. "Every statement, every action will be scrutinized and potentially misinterpreted." Harry listened, but internally, he wrestled with the personal and moral dimensions. How could he reconcile his love for Meghan with the monarchy's irreversible decree? How could he navigate the complex reality of his father's fury, the palace's meticulous investigation, and the glaring media spotlight? Even private family conversations became fraught with tension. In Buckingham Palace, behind closed doors, Harry faced the challenge of discussing the issue with his father while maintaining composure, diplomacy, and an appearance of understanding. He had to absorb the gravity of the king's concerns while also defending, in his own way, the woman he had chosen as his partner. It was a tightrope act, and every misstep could have far-reaching consequences. The emotional complexity extended beyond Harry's loyalty. There was anger, not at Meghan personally, but at the situation, at the forces that had brought the family to this point, and at the revelations themselves. Documents, emails, and correspondence uncovered by palace investigators painted a picture that was troubling and, at times, overwhelming. Harry had to confront the reality that the woman he loved might have been unwittingly entangled in networks with connections to the world's most notorious figures. Could he protect her while also preserving his own integrity, reputation, and relationship with his father? Then came the question of public perception. As news of Meghan's title removal spread, Harry had to grapple with a dual reality: the private turmoil within the palace and the public narrative that would unfold across headlines, social media, and global broadcasts. He knew that silence could be interpreted as tacit approval, while any statement could exacerbate the situation. Each choice carried risk, and the stakes were higher than any he had faced before. The palace advisors, well aware of Harry's emotional conflict, offered strategies, emphasizing measured responses and careful timing. "This is about controlling the narrative," they said. "You cannot afford to let personal feelings dictate public perception." But for Harry, the tension was visceral, human, and impossible to ignore. He had to manage not only the media and public, but also the deeply personal dynamics within his family, navigating a landscape where every action could be misinterpreted as loyalty or betrayal. Even private moments with Meghan were affected. Their conversations, once intimate and supportive, now carried an undercurrent of tension. Harry had to balance empathy for her distress with the stark reality that the palace had acted decisively. He felt the weight of responsibility, not just as a husband, but as a prince, a son, and a representative of an institution that demanded careful navigation of loyalty and duty. As Harry absorbed the documents and evidence presented by palace investigators, he experienced a profound sense of disorientation. What he had once assumed about Meghan's connections, intentions, and history now required reevaluation. There were questions he could not answer, details he could not fully verify, and implications that reached beyond his personal understanding. The web of associations was intricate, and the stakes, personal, familial, and institutional, were enormous. The emotional toll extended to Harry's relationship with the rest of the family. Discussions with William, Kate, and other senior royals were tense, filled with subtle negotiations of loyalty, trust, and information. Each member had their perspective, informed by years of experience, public scrutiny, and familial bonds. Yet, the underlying reality was clear. Harry was now caught in a position where every move carried potential for misinterpretation, and every decision could either preserve or fracture relationships. Advisors noted that Harry's approach was both protective and strategic. He sought to shield Meghan from public vilification while also respecting the palace's authority and the king's concerns. It was a delicate balance, one that required constant vigilance, careful planning, and emotional resilience. He had to act as mediator, defender, and son simultaneously, navigating a landscape that no prior generation of royals had faced in quite this way. Even as he wrestled with loyalty and truth, Harry's mind kept returning to questions of timing and consequence. How long had the palace known about these connections? Were there steps they could have taken to address issues privately before making such a public and permanent declaration? And, most importantly, how would Meghan respond in the coming days, weeks, and months? Each unanswered question added weight, tension, and emotional complexity to an already explosive situation. Outside the palace, the media amplified every detail, every leak, every speculation. Social media erupted with theories, debates, and outrage. News outlets around the world dissected the announcement, speculated on Harry's reaction, and questioned the implications for the monarchy. For Harry, the pressure was relentless. Every move, every comment, every silence carried significance, and the public's gaze was unyielding. Even as the initial shock began to settle, Harry knew the challenges were only beginning. He had to navigate an emotionally charged family dynamic, protect his wife, respond to global scrutiny, and grapple with evidence that suggested the situation was far more complex than he had imagined. The palace, meticulous and relentless in its investigation, had uncovered a network of associations and interactions that demanded both personal reckoning and strategic action. And in the quiet of his private quarters, Harry contemplated the impossible. How to balance love, loyalty, and truth in a situation where every choice could either preserve his integrity or create irreparable damage. He knew that whatever path he chose, the world would be watching, and the consequences would ripple far beyond the palace walls. But what came next, the discovery of documents, the revelations about previously unknown connections, and the evidence that would force Harry into impossible decisions, would change everything. And no one could have predicted just how far the palace investigation would reach, or the storm it would unleash on both his family and the world. The moment Buckingham Palace released the decree stripping Meghan Markle of her royal title, the world erupted. Headlines screamed across every continent. Duchess of Sussex permanently stripped of royal status. Royal family rocked by shocking decision. The monarchy in crisis. Within seconds, social media platforms flooded with speculation, outrage, and disbelief. Twitter exploded with hashtags trending worldwide. Instagram feeds overflowed with commentary, and news networks interrupted scheduled programming to cover the scandal. In a single instant, Meghan's personal crisis became a global spectacle. For the palace, the media storm was both expected and uncontrollable. They had prepared a carefully worded public statement, one that conveyed authority and finality while maintaining the dignity of the monarchy. But the reality of the 24-hour news cycle, combined with the relentless scrutiny of social media, meant that perception was now as critical as fact. Every outlet interpreted the decree differently, and the palace knew that controlling the narrative would be nearly impossible. Journalists dissected every word of the announcement. Analysts debated the implications of permanent title removal, speculating whether it extended to security, privileges, or ceremonial responsibilities. Pundits on television programs argued about the timing, the rationale, and the potential fallout for Harry and Meghan's future endeavors. International media framed the story in a variety of lights. Some emphasizing betrayal within the royal family, others questioning Meghan's past connections, and still others highlighting King Charles's decisive leadership. Meanwhile, the palace faced an entirely new challenge: leaks. Insider accounts, anonymous sources, and digital footprints provided breadcrumbs that journalists eagerly followed. Speculation ran rampant. Was this action in response to Meghan's alleged connections to Epstein? Did Prince Harry have prior knowledge? Were there documents or emails that proved the monarchy had irrefutable evidence? Even without confirmation, the public consumed every rumor with ravenous curiosity. Social media, however, became the battleground of public opinion. Memes, threads, and viral commentary spread like wildfire. Some celebrated the monarchy's decision, framing it as a necessary step to protect the institution. Others condemned it as cruel or excessive, portraying Meghan as a victim of an unforgiving system. Influencers, celebrities, and public figures weighed in, amplifying the global conversation. Within hours, the story became impossible to ignore. It dominated news cycles, trending lists, and international discussions. For Harry, the media storm added a layer of complexity to an already emotionally charged situation. Every post, headline, or tweet felt like a personal judgment. Every news segment dissected not only the palace's decision but also his reaction, or lack thereof. The pressure was immense. Silence could be interpreted as agreement or indifference. A statement could escalate the situation further. He was trapped in a high-stakes scenario, one where every action was amplified, analyzed, and broadcast to the world. Palace communications teams worked overtime to monitor the narrative, respond to inquiries, and manage public perception. They coordinated with royal advisors, legal teams, and security personnel to anticipate possible fallout. Even with these precautions, the sheer speed and scale of information dissemination made control nearly impossible. Misinformation, half-truths, and speculation spread as fast as verified facts. In the age of instant news, perception often became reality. At the same time, journalists dug deeper into Meghan's past. Investigative reports began exploring her earlier life, her social and professional networks, and any potential overlaps with controversial figures. Every charity event she attended, every high-profile acquaintance she had cultivated, every social engagement became fodder for analysis. While most of these connections were entirely legal and innocuous, the court of public opinion was less forgiving. The media created narratives, often speculative, that cast Meghan in a shadow of suspicion and intrigue. International media coverage intensified the scrutiny. Outlets in Europe, the United States, and beyond highlighted different aspects of the story. Some focused on the king's decisive action, framing it as a lesson in accountability for those associated with the monarchy. Others examined Meghan's life before marrying Harry, speculating on her relationships, influence, and potential connections to powerful networks. Each story, each article, each segment added layers of complexity and tension, reinforcing the global perception of a scandal far more significant than a simple title removal. The palace understood that the media storm was not just about Meghan. It was about the monarchy itself. The public, both in the UK and internationally, was forming opinions at an unprecedented speed. Social media amplifies everything: emotion, outrage, confusion. And in this environment, every misstep could have catastrophic consequences. The palace had to navigate this delicate ecosystem carefully, balancing transparency, discretion, and authority, while Harry and Meghan's personal dynamics added a volatile human element to the mix. As the coverage intensified, so did the leaks. Anonymous palace sources hinted at the depth of the investigation, suggesting that the decree was based on more than simple protocol violations. Rumors about hidden documents, confidential communications, and previously unknown associations circulated widely. Each leak created waves, prompting new headlines, social media debates, and viral conversations. The narrative became a living entity, growing, shifting, and evolving with every passing hour. Even the public discourse revealed unexpected dimensions. Longtime royal watchers debated the implications of the king's decision, speculating on whether it set a precedent for future generations. Others questioned the fairness of holding Meghan accountable for past associations, suggesting that her actions may have been misinterpreted or exaggerated. Across forums, comment sections, and chat rooms, emotions ran high. Anger, disbelief, curiosity, and fascination intertwined in a complex tapestry of public sentiment. Harry, in the midst of this, had to contend not only with the external media storm, but also with the personal implications for his family. Each article, each social media post, and each broadcast segment represented a potential point of tension. He knew that any response could escalate the situation or inadvertently confirm the narrative the palace wanted to control. Every decision required careful calculation, emotional restraint, and strategic foresight. Behind the headlines, palace officials monitored every angle. Communications staff prepared statements for potential scenarios, ensuring that any public interaction could be managed effectively. Advisors prepared briefings for senior royals, outlining key facts, potential questions, and likely reactions. The speed and scope of the media coverage required constant vigilance. What began as a single decree had transformed into a global spectacle, one that would demand unprecedented management and coordination from Buckingham Palace. Even as the media storm raged, new developments began to emerge. Investigative journalists published stories linking Meghan to figures who had interacted with controversial networks. While much of this information was circumstantial, the palace had long anticipated that any public-facing evidence would attract scrutiny. The combination of leaked details, social media speculation, and traditional journalism created an environment where misinformation and partial truths could amplify the perceived severity of the situation. And yet, in the midst of all this, the palace maintained its focus on the bigger picture, protecting the monarchy, preserving legacy, and ensuring that the actions taken against Meghan were understood as both necessary and irrevocable. The media storm was uncontrollable, but the message had to remain clear. The king's decision was final, grounded in facts, and motivated by the imperative to safeguard the institution above all else. But the storm was only beginning. As new reports surfaced, as investigative pieces revealed connections previously unknown to the public, and as social media debates intensified, the palace braced for the next wave. What came next? Documents leaked, testimonies revealed, and connections exposed would escalate the situation beyond anyone's expectations, forcing both Harry and the monarchy to confront challenges they could never have imagined. When Buckingham Palace announced the permanent removal of Meghan Markle's royal title, most of the world focused on the scandal, the public drama, and the emotional fallout. Few paused to consider the far-reaching legal and financial consequences that were quietly unfolding behind the palace walls. For the monarchy, every royal title is tied to not only status but also privileges, security arrangements, financial oversight, and ceremonial responsibilities. Stripping Meghan of her title didn't just send a public message. It set off a chain reaction with complex implications that could impact her, Prince Harry, and even the institution of the monarchy itself.